Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So, a big topic on everybody's mind these days is going to be inflation, right? Is it here? Is it not here? What is inflation? What's going on with it? Like how is it affecting me, you, everyone around you? So, the thing I want to talk about is predicting inflation, it's hard. And everyone's talking about, "Oh, you should have seen this coming." The signs were there, but it's really not that simple, right? Back in 1928, there was an economist named Irving Fisher, and he wrote a book called The Money Illusion, right? And it's all about inflation, right? The best way to view or think about inflation back then was through the lens of wars and how they impacted the economy, right? And in this book, right, he's going to lay out that relationship, right? So, usually, inflation comes when governments are in financial straits, especially in wartime or after a war has crippled the government's financial powers, right? Because war's always been by far the greatest expander of paper money and credit, and therefore the cause of the greatest price upheavals in history, right? Basically, the way things played out in the late 19th and early 20th centuries was something kind of like this, right? First, there would be a period of uncertainty during the war in terms of the outcome and which countries would be impacted the most. Next, there would be a post war recovery from all of the government spending during the war. All of that spending would lead to an overheating of the economy, inflation, and then a bust that would inevitably follow the boom. After a post war depression, the economy would find its footing, it would find its footing, when the next war came along, right? The early 20th century is littered with, enormous booms and busts from skyrocketing inflation to punishing deflation. Not only were the downturns magnified back then, but they also occurred more often than they do today. Aside from the inflationary 1970s, the post World War II era has been a much smoother ride from a price perspective than the pre World War II era, right? A more mature economy that isn't subject to depressions and economic panics once every few years, it's a good thing, right? It also makes it much harder to predict economic output using historic relationships, especially when it comes to inflation. Inflation just might be the hardest economic variable to forecast or understand in the US economy. There's a bunch of books, multiple books, about the 1970s inflationary spike. And, really, I'm still not quite sure the exact reasoning for it, right? There are plenty of theories, but no single satisfying narrative that helps explain what happened. The Fed has been actively seeking a 2% inflation rate since the end of the Great Financial Crisis. Yet, more than 63% of the time since 2010, the trailing 12-month inflation rate in the US has been less than 2%. They printed more money than ever before and kept rates at 0% for years on end, and yet inflation never really showed up. The market isn't great at predicting inflation either. The main argument at the moment about inflation is whether it's finally here to stay from all the government spending or simply transitory from a quirky pandemic economy. There are solid cases for both sides of this argument. The reasons this bout of inflation could be transitory, there's a couple. So the first one's going to be, we all have sorts of supply shortages from the pandemic as companies didn't foresee demand coming back online this soon, right? Another one's going to be people are ready to spend money, right? And they're ready to spend money now that things are opening back up. So there's a ton of pent up demand in the system, right? Things will eventually get back to normal once some of the supply bottlenecks are figured out and people spend more money on experiences rather than goods. Demand will slow eventually, right? Once the extra unemployment benefits end and no more government checks are on the horizon, right? Demographics remain a headwind. And the reasons inflation could remain elevated going forward, right? Some of them are going to be, millennials have an insatiable thirst for housing, which could make supply shortages stickier, than they should be, really, right? Once you raise wages, it's going to be impossible to lower them back to previous levels, right? Fiscal stimulus might be here to stay, which could lead to a new higher level of demand than we've had in the past. Psychology plays a large role in driving inflationary pressures, so it's possible consumer and company reactions could lead to higher prices based on expectations for future higher prices. Right? Personally, right, I'm leaning towards the transitory but higher than previous cycle camp, but honestly, I feel like it could go either way and I really wouldn't be that surprised. Um we've never conducted an economic experiment of this magnitude before. So no one knows how all of these trillions of dollars are going to impact the trends that were underway before the pandemic when it comes to demographics, when it comes to interest rates, prices, spending, and then, of course, supply and demand. The psychological component is probably the hardest part of all of this. Changes to wages, prices, and supply shocks can change people's behaviors in ways market models simply just can't predict, right? Everybody wants higher wages, everybody wants to work from home, the supply bottlenecks, why would I go out and get this when I can order it off Amazon? Why go out to work when I can just do it from home? A whole bunch of things are going to change, right? But one thing is for sure, the economy is far more interesting than the stock market is right now, right? So personally, I think there's probably going to be a small crash. I think it's going to trend up. It's going to be a small crash. It's going to trend up, but eventually there is going to be a big correction, right? 25 to 40% correction. So I would say, don't stop investing. Keep investing, right? But you need to save some money on the side for when that crash comes, because you want to dollar cost average in while you can. And then when that big crash comes, you want to have a big lump sum to be able to buy a whole bunch of everything really cheap while it's cheap, right? So hopefully this guy's, is going to help you guys understand a little bit of like why when you hear people talk about, oh, inflation's here, or inflation's staying, or inflation this, whatever talking about, a lot of them, I would say they have good basic principles and they're really trying to help. But predicting inflation is hard and no one has the answer. You're not going to find the answer, right? So I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and give this video a like and subscribe. And until I see you guys in the next video, y'all be safe.